The chandelier cast fractured shadows across the ballroom as Caleb lifted her hand, and pressed it against his lips like she was the only woman in the universe. Tara. My former best friend since childhood. My confidant. My sister in every way except blood. To the woman who brought back my happiness, he announced to the room full of 300 guests. To Tara, who reminded me what it means to truly live. The applause erupted like thunder. But I heard nothing except the sound of my own heart breaking into pieces small enough to swallow. I was Elena Ford, his wife of 12 years. The woman who had stood beside him through law school debt and failed business ventures. The woman who had carried his child. The woman sitting at the head table, invisible. My daughter, Sophie, was only 7. She tugged at my sleeve, confused. "Mommy, why is Daddy holding Miss Tara's hand?" I couldn't answer. The words were stuck somewhere behind the knot tightening in my throat. Caleb's mother, Margaret, leaned over with that thin smile she'd perfected over a decade. "Smile, Elena. You've done enough damage already." As if my mere existence, my refusal to disappear, had somehow caused this. The silver fork slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered against bone china. The sound was small, pathetic. Like everything I'd become in his shadow. His eyes finally found mine across the table. Not with guilt. With pity. That was the moment I understood. I had spent 12 years loving a man who saw me as an obstacle. And the woman I had trusted more than my own sister had been counting down the days until she could take my place. The humiliation burned hotter than shame. It burned like clarity. Sophie squeezed my hand. "Can we go home, Mommy?" "Soon, baby," I whispered. "Very soon, everything will change." I moved into the apartment 7 blocks away on a gray Tuesday in October. It was small, a studio that smelled of bleach and broken dreams, but it was mine. The landlord didn't ask questions. He'd seen women like me before. The first night, I sat on the bare floor with a spiral notebook and began to write. Not a diary. Not therapy. Evidence. October 15th, 8 p.m., Caleb called. Said I was destroying Sophie's life by leaving. Said I was unfit and unstable. Said I needed professional help. Classic narcissistic reframing. He's the one having an affair with my best friend, but I'm the problem. My therapist, Dr. Marcus, had given me a name for what was happening: gaslighting. The systematic rewriting of reality until the victim believes they're insane. Caleb had been doing it for years, I just hadn't had the language for it until I was free enough to see clearly. Narcissists don't just hurt people, Dr. Marcus explained during our first session. They rewrite the narrative. In his mind, he's not the villain. You are. And he'll convince everyone else of it too. I nodded, my hand cramped around my pen. How do I fight that? You document everything, she said simply. You become the archivist of the truth. So I did. I saved every text message. Every voicemail where he demanded I return home for Sophie's sake. Every email from Tara that I dug out of my archives, the ones where she'd confessed her confusion about her feelings for him, the ones where she'd promised our friendship meant everything, the ones sent just days before she supposedly fell for him. The timeline didn't match his narrative. None of it did. 3 weeks into my separation, Caleb made his first real mistake. He filed for emergency custody, claiming I had abandoned Sophie and was mentally unstable. He brought witnesses, his mother, 2 neighbors, his business partner. He brought Tara, who testified through tears about my erratic behavior and concerning mood swings. What he didn't know is that I had already contacted a lawyer named Mr. Cole, a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that saw through every lie. Mr. Cole had handled cases like this before. Women like me. Men like Caleb. We'll fight this, he said, but his voice was cautious. But we need to be smart. We need to be perfect. The custody hearing lasted 3 days. At the end of it, I lost temporary custody for 1 month. Sophie stayed with Caleb while I was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation and parenting classes, as if I'd done something wrong simply by trying to escape. I remember standing outside the courthouse, watching Caleb carry Sophie to his car. She looked back at me through the window, her small hand pressed against the glass. My legs nearly buckled. But as I stood there in the October wind, something shifted inside me. The pain transformed into something else. Something cold and precise. Something dangerous. "I'm going to take back everything he stole," I whispered to the empty air. My daughter. My dignity. My peace. Not with rage. With strategy. The apartment transformed into a fortress of evidence. I began with what I had: the text messages, the emails, the financial records. But I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of what Caleb and Tara had done. So I became someone I'd never been before. A detective in my own life. I opened a new email account, one Caleb didn't know about. I created fake social media profiles. I befriended Tara's cousin on Instagram and watched her stories. I hired a private investigator named David Chin, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. "I need to know everything," I told her in a coffee shop, my voice so quiet it barely carried. Financial crimes. Emotional abuse. Anything. David nodded. She understood. She'd been hired by dozens of women exactly like me. 2 weeks later, she brought me a folder thick with documents. Inside was a pattern I'd never fully understood. Caleb had established 3 separate charity accounts in my name, using forged signatures to set them up. Over the past 3 years, he transferred nearly $200,000 through them. The money disappeared into accounts controlled by Tara's brother, who had then moved it offshore. It was wire fraud. Money laundering. Identity theft. But there was more. Tara had taken out a personal loan for $50,000 using my name, my social security number, and a forged signature. The lender had already begun collection proceedings. I was legally responsible for a debt I'd never incurred. And the most damning discovery: text messages between Caleb and Tara dating back nearly 18 months. Not the beginning of a relationship. The continuation of one that had been going on in the shadows the entire time they claimed it started. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the texts. Caleb had written, "She's becoming too difficult. We need to move up the timeline. Once she's deemed unstable, we take Sophie, take the money, and you disappear to Costa Rica with the first batch." I've been planning this for 2 years. 2 years. He'd been planning to destroy me and steal from me for 2 years while I smiled at dinner parties and defended him to my skeptical father. The realization didn't bring tears. It brought ice. I began recording conversations. Every call with Caleb, every interaction, every moment where he tried to manipulate or control me went onto an encrypted drive. I was meticulous. I was patient. I was becoming something he'd never expect, a woman who understood that revenge wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a carefully constructed architecture built brick by brick. I called Caleb one evening in November, my voice soft and uncertain, the way he liked me. "I've been thinking," I said. "About what everyone's been saying. About how I've been acting. I think maybe I was the problem. Maybe I pushed you away." Silence on the other end. Then his voice, smooth as oil, "I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, Elena. I want to come home," I continued. "I want to be a family again. For Sophie." He agreed. Of course he did. The predator always returns when he thinks the prey has surrendered. I moved back into the house with careful steps, playing the role of the reformed, humbled wife. I smiled when he touched my face. I laughed at his jokes. I apologized for my instability. I performed the role of a broken woman perfectly because I had learned to watch him, and he had taught me exactly what version of me he wanted to see. But at night, while he slept, I copied every file from his computer. I photographed documents from his desk. I accessed his cloud accounts using the password he'd been foolish enough to leave on a sticky note. Every piece of evidence went onto that encrypted drive. I also did something else. I reached out to the IRS, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the State Attorney General's office. Not with accusations. With questions. With documents. With the kind of detailed, chronological presentation of facts that only someone deeply wronged could compile. I didn't expect them to move quickly. The system was slow. The system was broken. But I was patient. I'd learned patience from 12 years of watching a narcissist. December brought the first crack in Caleb's facade. The IRS audited his business. Then his personal finances. Then the charity accounts. Suddenly, there were questions about the money transfers, about the accounts opened in his wife's name without her knowledge, about the documentation that didn't match. Caleb's face turned gray when the federal agents arrived at his office. I watched from across the street as they led him out. He had no idea I'd been there. I'd been watching everything. At home that evening, he tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. Just a clerical error. Tara must have set something up without telling me. You know how she is. I smiled sympathetically while my phone recorded every word. Tara, meanwhile, was beginning to crack. The FBI had contacted her about the loan taken out in my name. She was facing federal charges for identity theft and fraud. Suddenly, Caleb's promises of love didn't seem so valuable. She tried to save herself by giving them information. She handed over text messages, financial records, and details of the plan that Caleb had orchestrated. And in doing so, she gave them the evidence they needed to charge Caleb with wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. By Christmas, both of them were facing federal indictments. Caleb's response was predictable. He tried to manipulate me one last time. He called from his attorney's office, his voice breaking. "Elena, please. We can fix this. We can get past this. I love you. I've always loved you." I listened to every word without responding. Then I played a recording of him planning to destroy me, the text exchange I'd found months ago. His breathing stopped. He understood, in that moment, that I had orchestrated all of it. "You're going to lose everything," I said quietly. "Your career. Your freedom. Your money. And you did it to yourself. I just helped you see the consequences." I hung up without waiting for a response. The custody hearing in January was brief. Caleb's attorney requested a continuance as he prepared his defense against federal charges. The judge looked unimpressed. Sophie was returned to my custody that afternoon. I drove to Caleb's parents' house and walked to the door with my head high. Margaret answered, her face pale. She'd read the news. She knew what her son had done. "I'm here for Sophie," I said simply. No one argued. Sophie ran to me and threw her arms around my neck. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair was tangled. She'd been crying. "Mommy," she whispered into my shoulder. "Are we going home?" "Home," I confirmed. "We're going home, and we're never leaving again." The federal trials lasted through the spring and summer. Caleb was convicted of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He received 8 years. Tara, who cooperated with federal prosecutors, received 3 years and was ordered to pay restitution. I watched Caleb's sentencing on a Thursday afternoon in July. He looked smaller than I remembered. Diminished. As if the consequences had finally made him real in a way that my pain never could. The judge read the sentence with the tone of someone delivering medicine. Mr. Ford, you have betrayed your family, your partner, and the law. Your sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes. I felt Sophie's hand in mine. She didn't understand what was happening, only that Daddy was going away. She was sad, but not devastated. Children are resilient. They adapt. And I was determined to give her a childhood free from the kind of manipulation I had endured. That autumn, Sophie and I moved into a cottage by the sea. Not because I needed to escape. Because I wanted to start fresh. Because I had earned the right to peace. I went back to school to finish my degree, something I'd abandoned when I married Caleb at 22. I started a support group for women recovering from narcissistic abuse. I rebuilt relationships with people Caleb had isolated me from. I learned to laugh without waiting for permission. Most importantly, I learned to trust myself again. Not the version of me that Caleb had broken down. Not the vigilante version of me that had orchestrated his fall. But a new version, the one who understood that she was both fragile and strong, both capable of love and capable of protecting herself. 9 months after Caleb's sentencing, a letter arrived from the federal prison. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked to the beach and watched Sophie build sandcastles in the afternoon sun. The wind was warm. The sky was clear. The future, for the first time in a decade, looked like something I could build instead of something I had to survive. That evening, I sat in my study and pulled out my old notebook, the one where I'd documented everything. The evidence, the lies, the timeline of my own awakening. I read through it with detached interest, as if it were someone else's story. In a way, it was. The woman who had written those pages had been someone different. Someone afraid. Someone desperate. Someone willing to become dark in order to survive. That woman had done what she needed to do. She had protected her daughter. She had reclaimed her life. She had held a mirror up to a man who saw women as disposable obstacles to his ambition. But that woman had also paid a price. There was a hardness in me now that hadn't been there before. A coldness when I thought about Caleb or Tara. An understanding of my own capacity for strategy and manipulation that was both empowering and slightly terrifying. Dr. Marcus said it was normal. You survived something that would break most people, she'd told me. You're allowed to carry the scars. You're allowed to be complicated. You're allowed to be both the victim and the architect of your own liberation. I thought about that as I stood on my balcony and watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. I thought about the dinner where Caleb had humiliated me. I thought about the woman across from me, invisible, forgotten. I thought about how far I'd traveled from that moment to this one. Love delayed is love lost, I whispered to the wind. But karma always arrives. Right on time. The letter from Caleb came during the second year. I still didn't open it. By then, I understood something important: his words had no power over me anymore. Whether he asked for forgiveness, proclaimed his innocence, or declared his enduring love, none of it mattered. The narrative was no longer his to control. Sophie thrived in the cottage by the sea. She'd made friends. She joined a soccer team. She stopped having nightmares. She learned that love wasn't supposed to hurt, that families weren't supposed to be dark and full of secrets. I completed my degree. I started a nonprofit for women rebuilding their lives after domestic abuse. I sat on panels. I shared my story, not for the sensationalism, but for the women who recognized themselves in it and needed to know that survival was possible. I also did something that surprised me: I forgave myself. Not Caleb. Not Tara. But myself, for not seeing sooner, for staying as long as I did, for the rage and coldness I'd allowed myself to become. That forgiveness was harder than any act of revenge. But it was the only thing that truly set me free. One evening, Sophie asked me a question that I'd been dreading. "Mommy, why did Daddy hurt us?" I sat beside her on the porch and took her small hand in mine. "Some people," I said carefully, "get so lost in their own pain that they hurt others. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just what happened. And what matters now is that we're safe. That we're healing. That we're building something beautiful." "Like this house?" Sophie asked, looking out at the sea. "Exactly like this house," I confirmed. "We took something broken and we built something beautiful." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the water. I thought about the woman I had been, afraid, invisible, gaslit into doubting her own reality. I thought about the woman I had become, strategic, cold, willing to orchestrate the downfall of those who'd hurt me. I thought about the woman I was now, whole, complicated, healed. All of those women were me. All of those versions had been necessary. But this one, the woman watching the sunset with her daughter, at peace with her past and excited about her future, this one was the truest version of all. "I love you, Mommy," Sophie whispered. "I love you too, baby," I replied. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you always know how worthy of love you are. How worthy we are." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting everything in shadow and light. And I realized that was the real story all along, not revenge, but redemption. Not the destruction of my enemies, but the reconstruction of myself. Love delayed, I thought, was indeed love lost. But love earned, love fought for, love rebuilt from the ashes, that was the truest kind of love of all. The wind carried my whisper out to sea. "Thank you, Karma, for finally bringing justice home." And somewhere in a federal prison, the man who'd tried to destroy me read a rejection letter from a woman he'd once promised forever. He would never understand that his greatest punishment wasn't the bars or the time or the humiliation, it was knowing that he'd been completely forgotten by the woman he'd once thought he'd broken. She had moved on. And in moving on, she had won everything that mattered. I sat invisible at that dinner table while my husband lifted another woman's hand. I could have screamed. I could have left in rage. Instead, I learned something that changed everything: silence is a weapon, and patience is power. They thought my stillness meant surrender. They were wrong. My worth wasn't measured by who believed me first, who sat beside me, or who my family chose to trust. It was measured by what I did when no one was watching, when I decided my own ending mattered more than their narrative. To every woman gaslit into invisibility, your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your refusal to break doesn't make you cold, it makes you a survivor. I spent years doubting my own reality because someone else convinced me it was broken. But I learned that the revolution doesn't happen in courtrooms or confrontations. It happens in quiet moments, when you choose yourself. When you document the truth. When you become the architect of your own liberation. Your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. If my story resonates with you, share it with someone drowning in doubt, someone believing the lies they've been told about themselves. Tell them they're extraordinary. Subscribe for more stories about boundaries, worth, and turning humiliation into triumph, because the power was always inside you. You were just waiting to find it.